Now we're good. Alright, so this week's episode 11, has been one of the most fun to record so far. I've enjoyed every episode I've done. Every episode, for different reasons, has been something to me. Whether that's just straight up enjoyable, whether it's been insightful, whether it's been moving at certain points. Every episode has been great to do for different reasons. But episode 11 to this date, in terms of ones that have been released, definitely one of the most fun to do. Definitely one of the most relaxed and just kind of at ease, finding myself in a groove. And I think, and this is maybe me judging myself a little bit too harshly, once again, as is standard, but I think it maybe took a little while to kind of find a sense of rhythm getting back into this, and also finding the rhythm of what this is. But by 11, sitting down with Sean, who is the guest for this week's episode, if you haven't listened to it, it was just generally a lot of fun. It was very natural because we have a natural sort of dialogue anyway. We've known each other for a number of years. He's been one of my best friends for a number of years, and just one of those things where it's just a very easy, natural conversation. And that's what I knew I would have going into it. But yeah, it was just funny and also insightful, as well. But definitely one of the most fun ones in terms of just sitting down and then really, really just enjoying it from top to bottom. Not that I haven't enjoyed every other guest, but I don't know. I think just because I've known him longer and there's better chemistry, I guess. But that, and I guess it boils down to, again, just finding a groove with what I'm doing here and what I'm doing with the show. So yeah, definitely one of the most I think obviously enjoyable ones. If you to listen to it, I think you can kind of tell that we're both enjoying ourselves a lot. So yeah, if you haven't checked it out, do. We are talking about all sorts of things. It is a real mixed bag on this week's episode. We're talking about working from home, how Sean has found that. We're talking about just like life during this whole craziness as a whole. We go off on some bizarre side tangents about naughty dogs, first jobs, trepanning, or triphany as I call it so erroneously in the episode, other old-timey medical techniques, talk about the pop man and global video, which are very northern English references, I guess. I don't think people down south had the pop man. They may have done. If you lived in the south of England, if you lived past Birmingham, and you had Birmingham and below, if you had the pop man, or you had a video man, let me know. Or is that just strictly a sort of cultural northern anomaly? But we also talk about VHS rental stores, global video, as I just mentioned, and there's a revelation in there which blew my mind, because I always thought global video was local independent, but apparently it's not. But I wanted to talk about, in this bonus episode, about VHS and about old media and about the sort of common duality that I guess exists now between physical media and digital media, because as we progress and we move forward and we become more advanced and enhanced in terms of technological integration, we are becoming more digital in every way, in terms of our presence, especially now, because we're having less physical closeness with people. But it's kind of been gearing towards that for a while, with the advent and sort of pursuing of social media and the sort of evolution of social media. We become more isolated and sort of connected digitally as it is, but also just in what we consume. What we consume is becoming increasingly digital, and the idea of accessibility is a great thing, and the idea of cutting down on storage and minimalism, which is a topic that I'm going to get into at one point in the show, because it's something that generally fascinates me. It's something that I had to kind of get into the mind frame of when moving over here. I had to really kind of adopt a sense of minimalism, because obviously you can't take everything overseas with me to live, so I had to be very selective. So minimalism is definitely of interest to me, and we will get into the idea of minimalism at some point. But minimalism really kind of does fit into the idea of physical and digital media, and the idea that we now have streaming platforms, and we have like streaming platforms for pretty much everything, essentially, in terms of media consumption, especially films, TV, and music. And it seems like a lot of people are kind of adopting that more and getting rid of actual physical media. Although there are sort of clusters and communities that really do thrive and love physical media, you will find like real vinyl junkies, vinyl collectors. I was one, and that is actually something I do miss, is having a vinyl collection, a tactile record collection where I can actually touch the sleeves, look through the liner notes, pull the record out and actually feel a physical connection. And it's interesting to see how many people are still clinging on to that, because there are. Looking into VHS stuff this week, as part of sort of promoting the show, I found a number of people that are still collecting VHS tapes, films on video. And yesterday I came across somebody who posted, I think on their Twitter account or their Instagram account, stills from a VHS copy of Return of the Jedi and Empire, which is really interesting because me and my wife are currently going through all the Star Wars films, but we're streaming them through Disney Plus. Other streaming platforms are available, I have to say that. I don't, but anyway. We are streaming the Disney stuff, the Star Wars stuff through Disney. And what's interesting about their version of it is it's a mix of the digitally remastered stuff George Lucas did in the late 90s with some additional stuff that's been added since. And I'll be honest, I find it kind of jarring. I find the idea of watching the original, for the most part, the original cut with the tactile practical effects, which I love and is one of the things that got me into film in the first place. And then having that sort of intercut with clearly late 90s CGI, which at the time Lucas obviously was thinking, I'm going to spruce this up, I'm going to polish it up and make it look better. But further down the line, some 20 years, watching the two mixed together is just really jarring. There's a lot of unnecessary stuff added to those films in terms of digital touch-ups and additions, and yet it seems like at the risk of sounding like an absolute hipster, there seems to be a sense of purity in more older tech and analog versions of stuff like that. So with the VHS copy of Empire, it's the original cut without any like dicking about, without adding stuff in, without polishing things up, and I imagine that it runs a lot smoother. Now, this isn't to say it affects the story that much. Empire is still an amazing film, but I would actually really like to see the original cut. Maybe not necessarily on VHS, but without the digital additions. And that got me thinking this week as well. Who else is going to be doing this? Who else is going to be taking older films and doing a George Lucas and touching them up and adding things? I really don't want to see that happen, because I think things should be preserved as they were. One of the charms of Star Wars, especially A New Hope, is the kind of very obvious tactile practical effects of it. The fact that it is sets, the fact that it is costumes, that it is animatronics and people in suits. There's something charming about that. There's something very sort of organic and just more connecting than just full-on CGI. And CGI is amazing, and computer graphics have come on leaps and bounds, and we've got some amazing visual feats and visual works over the last number of years, even just the last 3 or 4 years. We've had some great sort of breakthroughs in terms of digital animation. But for me, there's something just very pure. There's just something very earnest. And just, again, it just is something more resonating and something that connects a little bit deeper with practical effects, with sort of more analog ideas and practices. And it's the same with media. You know, I know a lot of people read books on Kindles, etc. Again, at the risk of sounding like such a hard-boiled hipster, I like the tactile feel of stuff. I like having stuff that I can hold and I can possess, and that, like with books, for example, one thing that I absolutely love doing is just underlining quotes in books, so that when I reread them, it's a little sort of note from my past self to my future self, saying that at the time this really struck a chord, this meant something. And I'm sure you can do that with digital versions. I'm sure you can like edit them, but it's not quite the same. I feel like, although there are definitely benefits to digital media, I feel like the more we embrace it, the more we move away from physical media and physical tactile things, the more we move away from the intimacy, the realness, the sort of earthiness, the natural organic connection between ourselves and what we're consuming. A little bit, not to get too sort of pseudo-philosophical or anything. But yeah, it's interesting to see how many people are still collecting old formats. It's interesting to see that even tapes made a bit of a surge in the last couple of years. People are collecting tapes, which to me is the format. That's the format of nostalgia for me, is cassette tapes. Because at a point, and this may blow some people's minds, especially those of a younger demographic, but at points you couldn't just go on Spotify and stream that song that you really like. At a point, you had to wait, usually until Sunday, till the top 40 came on the radio, and have a blank cassette ready, and you'd have to listen to the whole thing and be ready to tape the song that you wanted, and hopefully you'd get it without any snippet of the DJ introducing it, or going to the next transition. And this is sounding kind of just like an old man complaining about the hardships of technology nowadays, but it's something that I don't know, it just kind of felt like there was more of an appreciation for what it is that you were consuming back then, because you kind of had to do a little bit more work for it. Same with the internet, and it's amazing that we have the internet available 24/7 in our pockets. It's amazing. That accessibility is something I don't think we could have even thought of at one point. But it's too easy. It's too easy, and it's too much of a go-to. At a point when I was a teenager, to get on the internet, I had to use not one but two connections, like wind-up things where you plug them in. You plug the first one into your telephone port. Is that the line? No, that's the telephone line. The whatever the phone went into, and then you had to. Because the computer was up in the third floor on the attic, you had to roll this extending cord up one flight of stairs, connect it to another, and then you had to dial up, And granted, it wasn't the hardest thing to do, but it made what you were getting, it made what you were accessing, it made what you were then consuming once you were connected more appreciated, I guess, because you kind of had to do a little bit of work for it. But yeah, pros and cons, definitely pros and cons to diving into a more digital based future. But it's interesting to see that there are still people clinging on to it for different reasons. For reasons that I've outlined, the fact that it does feel more personal, it feels more personable, but also like a sense of nostalgia, which is something that we all sort of have present at some point. At any given time, there's always a sense of nostalgia, whether that is a nostalgia that you never experienced, like a lot of people who watch Stranger Things, for instance, appreciate the sort of 80s aesthetic and the soundtrack and the visual and the references, but a lot of people never had that frame of reference. So it's kind of like a nostalgia that is earned vicariously through people. Is that the phrase that I'm using, right? Vicariously. Not bi-curious, but I suppose it is kind of curious. Anyway, vicariously. So yeah, it's kind of like a false remembered nostalgia, which actually leads me to this, and this is a book recommendation I want to make to anybody interested in nostalgia and sort of retrofuturism. It's by Mark Fisher, who sadly is no longer with us, and it's generally fascinating. It's a deep dive into ideas of hauntology and retrofuturism, and it does look at physical digital media. It looks at the nostalgia that we connect to things that we remember, things that do sort of spark a nostalgia that we did have at different time periods that different people lived through, but also a sort of false nostalgia of living vicariously or bicuriously through other people's nostalgia and kind of absorbing it almost like a sort of sentient sponge, kind of. It's very dense at points, it's very wordy, there's a lot of particular British references, and there's talk about social political systems, especially within Britain during the 80s. So automatically, I know that's knocked a bunch of people off, but in terms of music and media and culture in general, especially music and film, and even TV to some degrees, it talks about the idea of retrofuturism, of a future that hasn't yet happened, but is steeped in a past that we can't seem to sort of shake away from. And Stranger Things is actually a really good example of that. The idea of something contemporary on a digital platform that is so steeped in analog behavior and analog expression through the 80s aesthetic and references. Yeah, I'm really not doing this justice, but definitely if you're interested in that sort of thing, if you're interested in the idea of the Venn diagram of then and now and sort of being stuck in a sort of vacuum somewhere in the middle, definitely check it out. It's called Ghost of My Life by Mark Fisher. And as I said, it talks about all sorts of things, but it does touch on the idea of physical versus digital media and the sort of glaring contrasts and even the comparisons and similarities between them, despite the vast difference in the actual format. Yeah, so I did ask for questions, and I did get a question from one of our future guests, Rachel. She asks, are MP3 players dead? I say no. To most people, the answer would be yes, because we do have such accessibility to streaming platforms like Spotify and Apple Music, and we have podcast applications where we do have our media available in a sort of ethereal, invisible network where we can just pull it at random. So we don't really have the need to store music on a hard drive as such. But just because we don't have the need doesn't mean people don't do that. I know for a fact they do. I know some people that still actually have older incarnations of the iPod Classic, which admittedly, and this is going to really make me sound like I'm like diving headfirst into becoming a full-on hipster, I actually wouldn't mind having, like, maybe not, actually no, like an iPod Classic, like the first. I would actually kind of like a first-gen iPod with the click wheel, and just fill that with music and have that as a separate music device. You do still see people that do have MP3 players. It's not as common, certainly, as it was, because at a point, like most tech, that has kind of become somewhat obsolete or is on the verge of veering into obsolescence. It was brand new, it was cutting edge, it was the thing to have. But now, obviously, as I say, we have moved on to the point where streaming is the thing. We don't have to have it stored. We don't have to take up memory. And that leads off into an interesting philosophical conversation, which we may leave for another episode, another bonus episode about taking up memory, like actual memory, human memory with what we consume, especially with the sort of plethora of accessibility to everything and anything now via the digital sort of realm of the internet. But yeah, people still use them. I, to a degree, actually still use my phone as an MP3 player. There's a few songs on there that I have, despite using streaming platforms. I do have a set number of tracks on there and a couple of artists and a couple of playlists stored on my phone just in case. Most people prepare for actual emergencies or accidents. I prepare for the possibility of not having Wi-Fi and needing something to listen to. So I don't think they're dead. I think they are becoming more of a niche. They are becoming more distant. But I don't think they're dead. I don't think any tech is really dead. I think, as long as you have people that are passionate about the medium which the tech supplements, you are always going to have the tech there at some point. Even VHS, to kind of take us full circle into a closing point, even VHS, even videotapes. I mean, I'm pretty sure there's probably some people with a Betamax collection because they prefer the format. It all goes down to preference, and again, it kind of goes down to nostalgia, which is ever present, which is omnipotent at any point, but you just see it more at certain times, I think. What's interesting about sort of the aesthetic and just the general presentation of VHS, sort of the look and feel of it, is that it is actually becoming more prominent. You look at stuff like vaporwave, you look at lo-fi videos on YouTube, you look at, definitely vaporwave is actually a really interesting sort of vessel for bringing back a particular aesthetic and style of the sort of mid to late 80s, early 90s with VHS effects and sort of tracking effects and glitches. You look at that and it's still very present, and it kind of goes back to this book that I was talking about not actually being able to really fully immerse ourselves into a clear and differentiated future. We're always still kind of clinging on to things that we knew to form what it is we are about to know in a weird way. But yeah, the long-winded answer to Rachel's question is no, I don't think MP3 players are dead. I don't think any tech is dead. You know, to sort of reiterate the point I was trying to make, I feel that as long as you have people that love the medium, that are passionate about the medium, you're always going to have people that cling on to the format. I mean, there are so many people, myself included, that actually do prefer 35mm film to digital projections. You know, anytime you can see an actual film projection rather than a digital one, do see it and experience it if you haven't before, and enjoy it, because it is different. There is a difference to it. People always talk about vinyl being something in that sense, about being different, about feeling the warmth, about feeling the crackle, and it's true. There's definitely something that isn't as clear cut or as refined or as neatly presented or as glossy, but there's something beautiful about that. There's something beautiful about imperfections, you know, that we tend to, as a society, really try and move away from. You know, you look at, I just want to make sure that doesn't cut out the battery. You look at how so many things are presented, and Instagram's a great example. Instagram's a really interesting anomaly that sort of crosses over between old and new, because it is a digital library of photographs that you take on your digital device, that you upload and you store in your digital library, your digital collection. But yet, one of the prominent features of Instagram, and one of the things that really made it sort of mushroom, was the vintage filter effect, was the fact that you could make a picture look like it was taken on a Polaroid or taken from like a roll of 70s film, 80s film, etc. And it's interesting to see how the two are merging. And again, you can never really escape a sense of nostalgia, whether it's nostalgia you've lived or nostalgia that is vicariously inhabited by yourself. So yeah, I lost the train of thought of what I was saying. This is what happens when it's just me without restrictions. But yeah, I've completely lost what I was saying. But yeah, no, I think 35mm film and imperfections and vinyl. Yeah, I think that there's definitely a sense of heart and soul to it. You know, in terms of music, I've never been somebody that is technically minded with music. I know a little bit, but I feel more. And it's the same with any sort of art form or medium of art or expression of art. It's something that I can look at it from an intellectual standpoint, and I can kind of pull it apart a little bit and take a peek at the mechanics of what makes it what it is or what it could be. But I've always been more about the initial feeling, the gut instinct about something, and I think that you get more of that with physical media, with older tech, I guess, because it does have imperfections. It has clicks, it has pops, it has scratches, it has glitches. One thing that I generally find kind of interesting and can fall down a YouTube rabbit hole, and again, it's the sort of I guess it's not so much a contradiction, it's more like a duality of, again, two styles, two periods, two formats meeting, is watching VHS glitch effects on YouTube, where people sort of digitize old tapes and show all the corruption that's happened to the tape and the film, and you see all the glitches, you see the breakdowns, you see all the patterns begin to sort of just completely become scrambled amongst just light breaks. It's fascinating, and yet I'm watching it on YouTube. Something that kind of falls into that, and this will be the last point because I realise at this point I am quite literally rambling, is William Basinski, the disintegration loops or disintegration tapes. I forget which one it is. That is interesting, especially if you stream it on Spotify, because you're using a digital platform to stream analog corruption of a tape that has just become so old and weathered and worn that it is warped, and that it's slowing down and breaking down. And it makes me wonder, thinking about the Brzezinski tapes, is that if that's what is actually going to happen. You know, I made the case that there will always be people that hold on to tech, and I do believe that. But are you going to see less and less of that the more we integrate ourselves digitally into the world, and the more the world digitally integrates itself into us? Are you going to see more of a breakdown, more of a warping of that technology? Is it actually going to become obsolete? Now, it's an interesting question that no one can really answer without the passing of time, ironically. But yeah, interesting stuff, digital and physical media. I want to know what your thoughts are on it. Do you collect stuff? Are you a book collector? Do you read on Kindle because it's easier? And it is, that's the thing with digital media, digital consumption, it is much easier. It's space consuming, it's time consuming, it's a great benefit, but you are missing out on the sort of human connection of it, I guess, the sort of human resonance of being able to physically touch something, of actually feeling the sensation of your hands, your molecules holding on to something that someone has made. Or are you strictly an analog kind of person? Interesting stuff. Yeah, let me know in the comments for this, which as I said, you can find over on the Facebook page. I'm going to put it up on the YouTube page. And yeah, if you've got other questions, you've got other topics about physical digital media, let me know in the comments below, and we'll maybe roll them over to next week's little bonus. For this week's episode, to kind of cue that up nicely, Sean is coming back for part 2, and we're going to be talking about something that is very tactile, something that is very physical, and that's his interest in woodwork that he's discovered during this whole COVID crisis, which I generally am interested in. I'm rubbish. I'm terrible with my hands. I'm terrible with actual physical activities. As much as I am an advocate for physical formats and physical media, I'm terrible at doing physical activities that require assembling or building or constructing or stuff like that. But I am interested in learning more about how other people have learned how to do those sort of things. So yeah, we're going to be talking about doing woodwork, and we are going to be introducing 2 random topics from a rolling list, which is going to be a prominent feature in episodes going forward. I'm not going to tell you what's on there. You've got to find out by listening, which you can do so at dimed-out.com. You can find everything regarding the show there, all the previous episodes, links to other stuff, and all sorts of good gubbins will be found over there at dimed-out.com. Other than that, I'm going to conclude this rather long-winded ramble, which hopefully made some kind of sense. It was slightly engaging, hopefully. I'm going to wish you all the best for the weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy, look after yourselves, look after each other, and until next week, keep it dimed out.